Oh, can somebody, can you click off the?
Is she coming to this meeting? She's
I
supposed to.
think so.
If she isn't, then you won't.
Hello,
Hi, Joe.
Oh,
hello. I think I'm just audio, no video.
Yes, you are.
You can live without my face, I guess.
We'll try. Did you get Louise back up here safely?
Yes, yes, finally, finally.
No. So Cheryl was gonna be on.
She is.
Oh, okay. And then we just need to.
Wait a minute.
Hey, Cheryl.
Hello.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So, okay. All right, we're waiting on. where's Rich?
I'm here.
There you are. We're just waiting. We're gonna give it about
Okay,
another couple seconds.
Sure.
Kevin Grubb, National Development Council should be hopping on any moment.
You text him.
Show him a text here. We do have his slides, though. You have
No
the
one-
slides. Okay.
Brendan, would you like this hard copy?
sure.
Yeah.
You gonna have him go first?
No, I was just gonna kind of do a refresher and then turn it over to him.
You wanna do that one?
Yeah, while we're waiting for Kevin to join us virtually, why don't, Rich, if you'd like to get started, I can just kind of go through a quick summary again, just to refresh everybody's memory on some of the key points of the new UTEP and kind of next steps. Rich is muted. Rich, are you muted?
Am I muted?
Nope, not anymore. There you are.
Okay. For some reason, I don't know why my video is not coming up. I don't know, but anyway, you can hear me. That's the important thing.
I can hear you. It looks like, do you happen to have sometimes if you have your camera blocked with anything? Because I'm not
No.
even seeing names.
No, yeah, and it shows that it's recording and I have it. I don't know what the problem is, but
No worries. But
Um,
Kevin Grimes is on, so if you want to, we could officially start if you'd like and.
okay.
Yeah.
So I have an agenda. Is that for this meeting or is that for the next governance committee meeting?
That's for
About-
this one.
Okay,
Just
so
to- Yeah, today's solely to
got the
focus on
minutes and
the
public
UTEP.
comment. We're doing all that, right? Okay. So we'll call the meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is to accept the minutes from the December 15th, 2021 Governance Committee meeting. Those minutes were sent out by Carrie. If there were any revisions, they were sent back to her. So we will accept the minutes for the record. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Anyone wishing to address the Governance Committee meeting has 5 minutes to talk with us. We ask that you state your name and address, and you have 5 minutes for your remarks. So at this time, open the floor. Is there anybody who would like to address the Governance Committee at this time? Okay, seeing or hearing none, we'll close that portion of the meeting. And then we'll move on to our main objective this morning, which is our discussion regarding the uniform tax exemption policy. So Stacy, did you want to kind of give us a little overview where we are and where we're going? And then we'll
Yeah,
take it from there.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. So the purpose of today is solely focused on review. Last month, I provided to you a review, a draft revised uniform tax exemption policy that I think looks and feels a lot different than our previous one. And I hope that that's sending us in a positive direction with a lot of discussions we've had over the last couple of years on our UTEP generally. So what I wanted to do is just to provide you a short summary, a few bullet points of the changes, and I think what we've done to strengthen our UTEP. And then I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Grems with National Development Council to discuss a significant new addition to the UTEP, which is a structure for a standard residential pilot program. And then, as far as next steps, the goal for today is really to get feedback from this group. And if the consensus is to advance this at our regular board meeting for final approval, what I'll do is make any potential changes today, distribute that to our municipal partners, and we can have this on our governance and regular board meeting on the 16th. So just a quick summary, the modifications. I read these last time, but I just wanted to kind of go through them again. So this UTEP was developed in coordination with NDC and reviewed by NDC. And also we used templates by other NDC developed UTEPs that include the city of Syracuse and New Rochelle. So we do have a thorough review and analysis of this UTEP by NDC. It places, as has been expressed by this board, it places more emphasis on the standard term rather than a focus on deviated pilots, if you will. So with the addition of the residential pilot program, I think that's going to demonstrate just I think a more standard process for these pilots as they move forward. And we do know a lot of our projects coming forward are housing projects, so it's good to have this standard structure or baseline for residential pilots. I think a key point of this is that it also, per the statute, the authorizing legislation, all pilots will be developed in-house by IDA staff in consultation with the developer and the municipality. And essentially, I think that's a key and core component of that. Most recently, I was in a discussion on Water Street development, and it was noted that the developer and the city had spent over a year on negotiating a pilot. The problem was the IDA wasn't present in those conversations. So it just, I think, demonstrates the need to have everybody at the table in the development of the pilots themselves. And of course, we have access to groups like NDC when necessary. It eliminates what we've kind of taken as an accepted practice of waiting for an approval by municipal resolution. Article 18A does not require this, but I think through the process of developing the pilot in-house in consultation with the developer and the municipality, I think it's going to be a stronger process. As I noted, it adds a residential housing pilot structure. It also more deeply defines what a qualified transferee of pilot benefits are. This was a topic that came up many times on how are we reviewing the requests when a property is sold and they request a transfer of the pilot benefit. It outlines all information required from the applicant in detail, which we did not have previously in our UTEP. It also outlines the process for cost benefit analysis, which is a requirement of the authority's budget office. And it also outlines the application process. So try to clear up any kind of confusion or miscommunication on what might be required of the applicant. So hopefully by the time the board sees an application for the first time, they have a much more comprehensive data set to review and analyze. So I don't know if there's any specific questions on that. If not, I'm happy to turn it over to Kevin Grems. Kevin Grems represents National Development Council. He's based in Connecticut. As you know, for many years, we've been a client community of NDCs. It's a very, I think, important relationship for us with what we do in economic development. Kevin's an instructor. He structures deals. He's run the gamut of using a multitude of financing programs, new markets, et cetera. And so he's been very involved with us in developing this revised UTEP. So with that, Kevin, I welcome and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Stacy. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me this morning. Yeah, I've been talking to Stacy and Natalie for quite some time in terms of making some modifications to the UTEP, and the UTEP is so important just for purposes of providing guidance to prospective developers in terms of what they can expect. And I think the UTEP is important to provide some initial guidance in terms of what they could expect relative to taxes. And I know that there have been a few residential developments that have come before you in the last few years, and I think based upon what we're seeing in Broome County, that for purposes of looking at downtown and multifamily housing, it's a good way to breathe life into the downtowns, whether it be Binghamton or any of the other villages or hamlets within the county. So we have NDC's had a lot of experience in the last few years with respect to large-scale residential developments become a lot more popular, and it become a lot more of the mainstay in terms of economic development, again, especially for adaptive reuse and new construction of bringing in a rental residential product as a means of breathing life into the downtowns. So with those residential developments, obviously a key is for the developers to figure out whether or not it could pencil out. So what we have done is in a few different marketplaces used our experience as NDC. Our core of what we provide is advisory services to municipalities and public benefit corporations like IDAs, and probably the most common role that we do is right sizing public incentive packages that sometimes are available through IDAs. So certainly for the pilots, it's a fairly easy argument to demonstrate that pilots are necessary in terms of attracting private investment. The key is determining what is the appropriate sizing of that financial benefit, particularly in the form of payment in lieu of taxes. So specifically looking at the terms that are necessary and the phasing to full taxes. So that's going to be a function of the, so what we do is, a lot of our affiliated products, we have a lending arm, we have a development arm, and we have an investment arm. So what we try to do is to use our experience as a lender, an investor, and a developer to determine what is most appropriate. And we try to do this, and we only do it on behalf of municipalities and public benefit corporations. So I think we have that objectivity in terms of right-sizing that public incentive package. So Stacy and I have discussed some of the residential developments that have come before you in recent years. And I think there's going to be a lot more based upon what we've heard and just looking at the general trends of development in other New York communities. So there's going to be a lot more. And, I think the key is providing some level of visibility, certain level of guidance to that. So we looked at the residential. Maybe you can go to the next slide, Natalie. And I've looked at some of the applications and some of the economics of these deals, and for a large scale development such as Victory Building, I mean it's not an easy undertaking, but there are other financial incentives that are available to encourage a project like that. In the form of federal and state tax credits, but it also helps to have some level of visibility with respect to the real estate taxes. And then for those developments that we have looked at, generally speaking, the economics do not pencil out. So I've recently looked at the Water Street development, and a little bit very surprised at where the taxes were coming in on a full tax basis, equivalent to $6,500 per unit. So for a development such as that, even though it's going to be market rate development, something that's at $6,500 per unit to start out is not going to allow that development to pencil out in terms of reaching the necessary metrics for the lenders, in terms of the debt coverage ratio, and the necessary metrics for the developers and their investors for yield to cost and internal rate of return. So for a development such as the Victory Building, or development or new construction such as the Water Street development, certainly a pilot is necessary. The key is what's the guidance in terms of that pilot in terms of the length of the term and the phasing of those taxes. So I think generally speaking, what we want to look to do is to stretch out the pilot whereby the phase into full taxes is reasonable, so that you have a reasonable runway to phase into full taxes. And what we've come up with, and this is fairly consistent and fairly common to other IDAs throughout New York State for a residential product, is up to 20 years. There's a few IDAs that limit it to 15, but if taxes are coming in high, such as Water Street at 6,500, I think 20 years is appropriate in terms of phasing into those taxes. So like what we've done in other communities, the abatement is fairly aggressive up front. And the abatement is aggressive up front for purposes of allowing the developer to reach those metrics during its stabilization period. So we lock in a fairly high abatement in the early years, and then we have a full phase into a straight line phase in years 4 through 20. And what we look to do in terms of structuring these pilots, we look to demonstrate that the pilot paid during the term of during the pilot term exceeds the benefit or exceeds the savings provided to the project. So that if you look at it this way, over the term of the pilot abatement shouldn't exceed 50%. So the taxing jurisdictions get more than the savings that they provide per virtue of the the pilot. And last week I presented 2 different phased-in scenarios for consideration. So and what I wanted to do is to try to test these phase-in schedules to a hypothetical development example of what you might be able to see. So I started with a few different assumptions. So on this assumption, I assumed an 80 unit residential development that also has a modest amount of ground floor commercial space. So it's a mixed use building, but it's a majority of residential product. So it's 80 residential units, ground floor, 4,000 square feet. So the total gross square feet for this hypothetical development is 80,000. So I assume that this would be on an existing lot, might be a building, may be completely vacant. So I had to assume what the base taxes, what the current taxes are. So in this example, I assumed $25,000. And then the improvement taxes, I estimated to be at $4.50 a square foot. And indeed, in some of these cases, we saw that the as complete taxes are actually coming in higher than $4.50 a square foot. Water Street property, it's equivalent to $6.50 or $6,500 per residential unit. So I didn't start that high because obviously these are going to come in at different levels in terms of as complete taxes. So in this one, I started at $4,500 per unit. But if we apply $4,500 per unit, and that is the starting taxes, we're not going to be able to demonstrate sufficient debt coverage ratio on the lender side or sufficient returns on the investor side. So the deal would not work. So in this case, the example that we have is that the abatement starts off at 90%. And I'll emphasize that 90% is applied to the improvements, not the baseline taxes. So as you have a 90% abatement on the improvements, and then after the stabilization period, after year 3, you have a straight phase-in to full taxes. So you have about a 5% phase-in schedule in years 4 through 20. One of the things that I wanted to point out is addressing an issue that I had mentioned a few minutes ago, is that with these pilots, what you want to look at is that the dollar amount of the pilot exceeds the savings that you provide to the project. And in this particular example, during the 20-year period of time of the pilot, there would be $3.7 million of taxes or pilot payments made. And that's equivalent to, or on average, annually, there would be $186,000. Now, compare that $186,000 to this hypothetical example where the baseline taxes are $25,000. An average pilot over that term, $186,000, that's a 7 times multiple of existing taxes. So even with these pilots, even though they're getting an abatement, the multiplier effect in terms of new increment is quite strong. So that 3.7 is paid over a 20-year period of time. Compare that against the savings. The savings accorded through the pilot results in $3.3 million of savings to the project. But therein lies the important policy objective of a pilot, that the payments made on that pilot schedule exceeds the savings provided to the project itself. So
Can I ask a
Sure.
question? That is there any way that you can explain to us? Are you using column D in those to create
yeah,
the pilot?
the abatement in column F to
Mhm.
get the saving, the savings is D. Actually, I'm embarrassed to say I made a mistake here. I think the numbers are right, but that abatement percentage is applied to the improvement taxes, not the as complete taxes. So the savings is the abatement percentage applied to the improvement taxes.
Okay.
Okay, so the math is right. It's just that D times F should. That is right. D times F. The savings is D times F. The improvement taxes times the abatement percentage. So that's how you get the savings, and then the pilot is simply the as complete taxes minus minus those savings.
Okay. Sorry, I
Okay.
wasn't sure. I wasn't trying to. I was just trying to. I'm on an iPad, so it's small. So, is there any way to make sure that we can see this? Like, it can be emailed around.
We'll get it right out.
Yeah, I'll do it right now.
Thank you.
I have a quick question too, if it's okay,
Sure.
Kevin. I agree totally. I think a fundamental foundation stone should be that the saving that the taxes a municipality receives should be higher than the savings. That makes a lot of sense for a lot of different reasons. The question I have is, what's the threshold? I mean, if it's $1 more, is it still, I mean, is there some kind of range that makes sense, or is it just the theory it should be more?
Well, it's a great question, and that's why I'm giving you two different schedules for consideration. In this case, I'm sorry, who had asked the question? Jim?
Rich Bucci.
Rich. Hi, Rich. Yeah, so Rich, in this case, and you probably can't see it on the screen because it's small. What is highlighted in yellow?
No, I can see
The
it.
3.7 is 53% of full taxes.
Right.
And the 3.3, i.e. the savings, is 43%. I'm sorry, 47% of savings.
Right.
So you certainly want to be above 51%, but in this case, you're just barely over it. And I think there needs to be some level of flexibility. Again, this is meant to be as guidance, but then for every individual transaction, you want to take into consideration of what they're dealing with. So, Water Street, that's going to come before you soon. I've looked at those numbers, and right now we're in a situation where the construction costs have mushroomed in the last year. I hear in every marketplace that I'm working in, like, oh, the construction costs have gone up 20% since we last looked at it. And that's pretty consistent. The construction costs up 20% as a result of the increased cost of materials. So we're looking at this schedule applied to the Water Street development, and it's fairly tight from a financial analysis standpoint. But going back to your question, in this case, it's 53% to 47%. So yeah, you want the payment to exceed the savings, and the split is 53 to 47. Natalie, if you go to the next slide. In the next slide, my schedule is a little bit different, whereby in the first 2 years, we still have fairly healthy abatement percentages, 90 and 70%. In year 3, I drop down to 50%, and we lock in a 50% abatement for years 3 through 10. And then in years 11 through 20, we're reducing that abatement 5% every year until the abatement fully burns off. So Rich, in this case, what is highlighted on the bottom is that the pilot paid during the 20 years is 4.2 million, and the savings is 2.7. So the pilot is 61% of full taxes during the term, and the savings is 39% of full taxes during the term. So really what we're seeing in this instance is that the project is paying 60 cents of every full dollar of taxes. And this obviously is more advantageous to the taxing jurisdictions. So if the economics of this can work, this is more preferable.
Yeah, that's a healthy ratio, without a doubt.
Yeah, yeah.
We see example 1 again. But I want to make sure I understand this correctly. Example 1 looks like the model schedule that we've proposed. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's 3 years at 90 and then 5%.
Right.
And then so if we go to example 2, where you've changed the abatement percentages, help us understand what scenario would that likely occur? Because it looks like to me a deviated pilot, not to the benefit of the developer. So how would that schedule that's shown in number 2 ever come to fruition?
Well, and this is your choice now. You could go with a more aggressive schedule such as this as part of your baseline guidance.
I understand. That's very helpful. Okay.
And then if the developers are demonstrating hardship based
Yeah.
upon the schedule, you change that modification. But what I would suggest, even though you'll have the flexibility to modify the schedule, in no way do you want to look at a schedule that results in the pilot being paid during the term be less than the savings that you provide during the term.
Of course. So are these, I guess one final question then. So the schedules that we've got in the revised UTEP look more like one than they do number two, correct? Would there be any benefit? So when we see example two, if we had a schedule that was a hybrid between 1 and 2, would it maybe put us in a better starting position, or would it just generate more requests for deviated pilots?
Well, I think if the mill rate is very high in the city of Binghamton, and that's why the taxes for Water Street are coming in at 6,500.
Right.
This is not going to work. An example number 2 is not going to work for Binghamton.
Okay.
Or Water Street. So it's going to have to be closer. And given what Stacy had mentioned, that the developer has been negotiating this with the city for a long period of time.
Right.
That's all well and good, but ultimately, the pilot has to be approved by all of you. And then the IDA hasn't been at the table. So yeah, that is a problem, and that's what's going to change from this moment forward. Because let's face it, that's why I was saying to Stacey is that the reason we have industrial development agencies is to professionalize the review of these, so that it is not done individually by the municipalities. So hopefully that changes, that where there's IDA involvement from the get-go for some of these large-scale transformational developments.
And I think, Kevin, I think Jim, to your point, I don't see any reason why we couldn't use both of these examples as benchmarks. I think the finances are going to dictate, a scenario, as Kevin mentioned, in the city of Binghamton, where the taxes are significantly higher. The scenario of a 60-40 probably won't work, and it might be, so I think we can use these as benchmarks for running the financial analysis, and they're going to lend themselves to run up whatever the number, they're going to come in near one of those, I guess, to make the product work.
Right.
And
So my question, I guess, and that's a really good point, Stacy. And I guess what I'm wondering is, it sounds like we're gonna have better information to kind of engage in a more constructive fashion, or at least.
Yeah, because we can run the test with these two scenarios.
Right,
And,
but if the model schedule is basically, right, it's 3 years of 90, kind of like example 1. Would we be better off to have that model schedule look a little more like example 2, or somewhere in the middle, 1 and 2?
Yeah.
So that if you have to negotiate, you have somewhere to go. Because if you make it number 1, which works for the city of Binghamton, where do you go after that?
With municipalities that have different financial characteristics, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like if they can make it more favorable for the municipalities in terms of the taxes collected, you can always scale it back, and where you're going to have the numbers to know whether it's reasonable or not. But if it seems like if you start real high, you're never going to wind up with example 2, even if it's appropriate.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
I totally agree.
So
And just one other comment, just looking at the chart, which has the new construction, the existing, and the improve, expand. We are using the word frozen in the existing facility and the expansion. And we just have to remember, we had that issue with, was it Leicester Ave? Where it was 0 because the prior owner was a non-for-profit. So I'm wondering if we need to come up with different terminology, because we don't want it frozen at 0.
Well, I think we did change that, Cheryl, in this.
Yeah, we changed that language.
We did?
That was,
Okay.
that was even changed, and that's changed in the existing UTEP right now, that
But I'm-
will never happen.
You're saying demonstrate it on the schedule itself.
The schedule itself, I have the October 2021 red line that I'm looking at. Let me
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I think the
Could be
chart itself
confusing.
might be confusing because I think
Gotcha.
it uses frozen, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're right. It's not consistent. The language inside the UTEP acknowledges that it's not frozen, but it's not.
But the chart
demonstrated.
itself says frozen. Yeah,
Yeah, we can fix that. Thank you for that.
you're welcome.
Kevin, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. So Natalie, if you could just go to the next slide. I think a few things that are fundamentally important to keep in mind for each and every one of these. We want to have thorough financial information so that we can gauge the financial issues that the developers are facing. So we look to establish a pilot policy to demonstrate that, because obviously you want to encourage these investments and these deals to be done. So we have to provide the appropriate level of incentive. But, getting back to the issue of the guiding principle is that you should be paying more in pilot than the project should be getting in savings. That's, I think, threshold number one. But the other issue is that you have to demonstrate the but-for test, that but for the availability of the pilot per the schedule, this deal doesn't happen. But you have to reach one step further, but for the pilot, the deal doesn't happen, but also demonstrate that it was appropriately sized where there's no undue enrichment. Because I've been around and seen a lot of pilots that have been structured way more generous than they should have been. And there's an issue of structuring a pilot to provide undue enrichment to the applicants. So you want to be able to stand behind a decision that it was sized to create financial feasibility without providing undue enrichment. And that's why you need the numbers. So, yeah, and I've had this discussion with Stacy and Natalie and Brendan, is that in addition to the capital budget, you need the operating budget so that you can plug in the operating budgets with the proposed pilots to demonstrate that, yes, this is sized appropriately. We're meeting the metrics. And I look at it from both the lender and the developer and the investor perspective. Got to demonstrate that it meets the debt coverage ratio. And then I look at 3 return measurements: cash on cash rate of return, yield to cost, and internal rate of return. And we have an understanding of what the market needs for those thresholds. So the pilot is structured to meet those thresholds, but not provide undue enrichment in terms of, there are developers that say, well, I want a 20% internal rate of return. Well, that's all well and good, but we're not necessarily going to structure this so that you get a 20% internal rate of return, because plenty of other developers and investors are doing things to get a 12% internal rate of return, not a 20% internal rate of return. And then finally, we looking at the full public benefits exceed the project benefits. So I guess it goes back to, I provided 2 different schedules. The schedule 2 is more favorable to the taxing jurisdictions. So it might be better to have the schedule in the UTEP that is more favorable to the taxing jurisdictions. Then it's up to the developer to demonstrate that, no, that doesn't work for us. And then there's a consideration to say, okay, you demonstrated that schedule doesn't work for you. So that, that in schedule number 2, the abatement is 50%. But in the Water Street development, full taxes is $6,500. if you have a 50% abatement in year 3, that's still a pretty hefty tax, 3250 in year 3 to absorb, for the operating pro forma to absorb. So I'd be the first to say that that's not going to work for that. But for other developments that don't have extraordinary cost, and hopefully the construction market stabilizes, whereby the cost escalators that we're witnessing in the current marketplace is going to stabilize and it's going to go down at some point.
Kevin, can I ask a question here about, it seems to me that we have some good numbers between columns, columns G and H in example 1 and 2. And I know we want to have a chart, an illustration in the policy. I think we're almost need to, but I do like your idea of maybe using example 2, but I'm wondering if using those numbers as a range, like we don't want to go less than 1 if it's necessary, but then our default is 2. I'm wondering if using those percentages, keeping the savings, between 39 and 47, and the pilot expenses being between 61 and 53. Have you ever seen any policies that used those numbers as benchmarks for the boards?
There's nothing per Rich's question. All right, is 53-47 in terms of that split sufficient? I think one, that the threshold number 1 is that it's got to be at least 50%, and we prefer to be 60% rather than 50%. And that's why with number 2, where your average abatement over 20 years is roughly 40%. That's a good policy to see. That generally speaking, we don't want to provide more than 40% savings over the term of the pilot. So this can be your guidance or your baseline, and you have the opportunity to transition to something that's more aggressive on the abatement, such as outlined in number 1. And certainly with a lot of IDAs, they have a few different schedules. So you could put in both schedules and say, look, we'll analyze the economics of the deal to determine which of these that will provide. But there's nothing wrong with stating that you want, our preference is to go with schedule 2.
Seems like, Kevin, you've certainly done a lot of this. It seems like if you put 2 of them out, I think I know, if I was the developer, which one I'd want.
Oh, sure.
I mean,
Exactly.
they're always going to default to that. So why would I think the point that you made earlier was insightful, that use schedule 2 and make them prove otherwise.
Yeah, exactly.
That's part of the negotiation. Don't tell them ahead of time and show them our hand and say, well, we've got this, but if you don't like that, you can do this, because they're just going to start with that one. I think you start with number 2, make them prove wise. Maybe we've got to do a little education at the board level once this is approved as to what the metrics really look like and what they mean, right? Kind of what you were explaining to us, that 60% is good and 51% is not so good, and what we're shooting for.
Yeah, because the next deal coming to you might be in a different village or hamlet, whereby the mill rate's a lot lower. So instead of 65,
they're all going to be different. But if you've got a standard methodology on which you evaluate them, I think it's fair to the developer, it's fair to the municipality, and it's fair to the taxpayers.
Yeah,
Jim, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. I think we use the more advantageous schedule, and then if we have to modify it, that's where the deviation comes in. The other thing I think is important that we have to lay out very clearly to all developers if the ratio doesn't show, regardless of what pilot we choose, if the ratio doesn't show a savings, to, an advantage to the taxes versus savings, it's a no deal. I think sometimes we're afraid to tell somebody it's just, we can't do it. But I think having that threshold is the taxes have to be greater than the savings is a great place to operate from.
Yeah. And Rich, going back to your question, is there a standard percentage that you should be looking to get? I certainly like the 60-40 better than the 53-47.
Sure.
Because the other thing we have to consider is that when we're doing, say, a cost benefit analysis or looking at the project benefit versus the public benefit, the public benefit is obviously the aggregate pilot. And in this case, the aggregate pilot is a little over 60% of full taxes. So the project benefit is the savings, the 2.7 in savings. But let's also remember that through your packages, you're also providing sales tax savings as well as mortgage recording tax savings as well. So when you're looking at the public benefit, which is the pilot, you want to make sure that the public benefit, the pilot, exceeds all of the benefits that you're providing to the project. So in this case, if the public benefit is 60% of full taxes and the project benefit is 40% of full taxes, but you're also adding on the savings from the mortgage recording tax and sales tax, that's why it's better to have a 60-40, so that when you compare the full pilot, you're demonstrating that that exceeds all the benefits they're getting from the IDA, because it's more than just the pilot.
That's a good point. So in other words, right here, what you've outlined was, did you include sales tax and mortgage tax in this?
No,
formula, or just-
I didn't run
That's a
that,
good,
but-
no, I think that's great, because that's a good point for us to consider, is that we also add in the mortgage tax and the sales tax, and to get a true picture of what the taxes are going to be and the savings is going to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we do capture that in our cost benefit. We do. include
Oh, right.
those.
But I think
Yeah.
that's a good
But
point.
yes, it is a good point, yeah.
Yeah, so in this case, the pilot paid is 4.2, the savings is 2.7. If I had to guess, the sales tax and mortgage recording tax is probably another 500,000. So then when you do the cost benefit, you have the taxes paid, pilot paid at 4.2, and then between the savings 2.7 and the additional sales tax and mortgage recording tax of 500, that would be at 3.2. So you still on a positive level.
Am I
Oh, yeah,
right?
sometimes the sales tax is even higher. I mean,
But-
it can be in the millions sometimes.
But my recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, your full analysis includes that, right? This is an example for illustrative with just the pilot, but your
Yeah.
full workup includes the mortgage and the tax, correct?
Yeah, when we do the cost benefit, when we do those reports for other IDAs, yes, that
Full
is
report.
factored.
Okay.
So like you're working on Water Street. So when you're doing Water Street, you're going to include the mortgage tax and the sales tax?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and with Water Street, there are there are extenuating circumstances on that, because the developers also have to absorb a air right lease payment. So not only are they paying the pilot, but they're also making an additional payment to the city, and that has to be factored in. So our our first deal out of the gate that is going to be upheld against this standard is not going to meet it. But there are financial considerations that provide exception to trying to meet this these thresholds, whereby the pilot is going to be more than the savings provided.
So you're saying there's a possibility in the Water Street, the savings will be greater than the taxes paid?
We picked a really good one to start with.
Well, we don't have to get into it today.
Yeah, but I
No,
think,
it's a possibility, yeah,
You know what,
because
though?
of the complexity of it with the
I think-
bond payments and the air rates, yeah.
Why don't- I mean, I don't understand where this air rights came from. What are we, Midtown Manhattan? I mean, where did air rights come from?
Well, basically, they're building it over the newly
A
constructed
parking garage, I know, you're right.
garage. So there's a value to that, to their ability to build over the garage. So instead of building on the land, they're building over the garage. But there's a value to that real estate because they're, you know, to the city's point, they shouldn't be getting it for free if they have the, because, you know, there's another cost structure. I mean, a source structure that covers the parking garage. But they have the opportunity to build on top of the garage, but that's real estate. And there's a value to that underlying land. That's where the air rights come into.
Well, you know, like we can talk about that later, but the city wants that project and, you know,
but I,
they can find a way to make it work. But that's a topic when we get to it full scale.
well, you know
I
what,
guess.
I think what this points, what Water Street's gonna point to or show us, maybe hopefully for the last time, is what happens. No, yeah, right, exactly, because we're gonna get one that we're gonna probably have to hold our nose on. But I think it's the whole reason that we're going through this process, so that we don't run into situations where any municipality is engaged with a developer or had its heart set on a project for over a year, and then comes to us with a less than optimal deal. And I think this illustrates that point perfectly, right?
Yep,
I mean,
yep.
they're not gonna go
But
back.
how do you agree to one deal and then when somebody comes, you know, down the line a year later, say, well, we made an exception for them, but we're not making exceptions anymore? I
Well,
mean, that's my concern's always been about precedent setting.
well,
Right, well, but that's the exact reason why you're going to have an updated, because up until now, you know, you don't even see the word residential in your UTEP. So now you're going to have something in the UTEP that represents the expectation of the agency for a residential or a mixed use development.
I mean, the Water Street could be an acceptable deal under the current UTEP and what's in front of us. But when we adopt a new one, there's going to be new standards and those are going to apply. It's no different than, you know, if the speed limit used to be 55 and now it's 65, you got a ticket one and I didn't at the other. I mean, rules change and how we apply them change, and there are going to be inconsistencies when you do that, and so be it.
Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, this schedule, it was about 5 years ago, we for one IDA, we updated the UTEP, and for the residential, and this was in New Rochelle, we updated the UTEP to include the schedule 9070 50. There have been 34 deals that have come in the last 5 years, amounting to over $4 billion of work that has been approved. All but 5 of them were approved based upon that schedule. There are 5, maybe 7 that demonstrated unique financial circumstances that necessitated a deviation from this schedule. And by the way, there wasn't any level of development activity for residential buildings downtown before the UTEP was updated. But between that and establishing predictability with respect to taxes and predictability with the land use, all of a sudden the floodgates open up. I was like, okay, now we understand and we can determine whether or not this makes financial sense. And, you know, what we did is that we modeled hypothetical developments based upon the schedule and said, yeah, this should work out. I'm a little bit, you know, when you have a county where you have different tax rates, it's a little bit more difficult to know that one schedule is going to work for everything. because those taxes are going to come in at varying levels based upon the different mill rates you're dealing with.
That's why I think it's so important that we have the analytics, because that's the only real way to be able to compare the equity of one deal versus another deal.
Yeah.
Right. If you don't do the analytics, given all the different jurisdiction or municipalities we have, the tax rates, et cetera, we need to have a standard policy. Then we do the analysis, and then it tells us what we need to do, and we can put them. When you start doing that, you can start looking at the deals along a continuum from good to bad.
Yeah, and it gets to the issue with the term, because there have been longer terms that have been approved just because there have been others that got longer. But the fact is that you probably don't need terms as long as 28 or 30 years to create feasibility.
And we've now, and Jim, to your point, we've now outlined in our UTEP all of those materials required, for cost, all of those financial materials that are required now. And I think the predictability that Kevin references over time, the law of averages, I think we'll know, at least for the time being, if it's a project in the city of Binghamton, that percentage might fluctuate compared to, town of Union or something like that because of the tax rate differentials. But law of averages, I think we're gonna start to see that predictability for, these projects as they move forward, which I think is what the board's been looking for, is just, straight line comparisons with good financial data supporting it.
Agreed. You did a really good job, Stacy.
So, what we'll do, if I'm hearing the board correctly, we can use as our baseline Schedule 2, recognizing it is a baseline. We'll look at all the financials to determine, if it meets, if it works. But we can add, I get the consensus is to add Schedule 2 as our baseline. We can switch that up on the residential side and use that for comparison, but now at least I think you have we have a range that makes sense to everyone now.
I would agree with that. I think using 2 makes more sense.
So other than that, we'll come through this again and just make sure that the language is everything we needed. I do want to go and double check. Cheryl, to your point, you reminded me, I want to double check that we carried over the language on if it's a currently non-taxable property, that there is it goes to the baseline taxes. So I'll go through this and make sure, and then my plan would be to send this to our municipalities throughout the county, state, locals, town boards, et cetera. We will ask for feedback, but it is, again, the board's discretion to approve this. And if you guys are on the same page, we can have this on February's agenda so that moving forward, this will be the new baseline UTEP. And then just on Water Street, as Kevin noted, we did have a meeting with Kevin and some of our team and the city and the development team of United Pike. We're still waiting a little bit of information from them. So, we're moving at the pace that they're moving. So, we have not yet scheduled a public hearing on this yet because and as soon as we have that information, Kevin will finalize the financial analysis and we'll get that out to the board.
So Stacy, we can move forward and approve the new UTEP without waiting for the feedback from the municipalities?
That was
we
what
can
I was
approve.
gonna.
Go ahead, John.
Okay. Question, Stace, is would it be wise to clean it up, circulate it, and say, invite them to a Zoom call to listen to their comments? I think
We did talk
makes
about
more
that, and
sense.
but we're finalizing a slide deck, which we can do prior to our meeting.
Yep.
As far as but as far as authorizing legislation, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have to notice, we don't have to get approval. Correct, Joe?
True.
Correct.
Yep.
No, I
So we
understand
will-
that. I was talking about just as in a point of collegiality.
Yes,
So,
I
of
wasn't looking for a vote from anybody other than to say, hey, we've presented it, you've heard us, we've listened to your comments. I just, I don't want to be accused of blowing off the municipalities, that's all.
You know what?
Absolutely not. No, and then, like I said, I think last time we spoke, we talked about putting together a short slide deck that runs through the changes and the benefits to the new tax UTEP, and we can get that out and scheduled for next week as well.
Yeah, I'm all for expediency, Stacy. So I think that's great. I just wanted, you were gonna get this done before the meeting. Excellent. I just wanted them to know that they had an opportunity to comment before we voted. That's all.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yep, agreed.
You see, along that same line, I'm not trying to make it more complicated. Is it worthwhile, but, there's always a but. Should we is it worthwhile to run it by any of the developers, or just developers I know there's not a discrete group of developers, but it just.
I would say no to that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, part of our mission is to obviously include the stakeholders, but, part of our job is to also encourage development. And
Sure.
just give them, at least let them, you're going to be as influenced by what they say as you are by the municipalities. If there's a valid point, there's a valid point, but I wouldn't see personally, I don't see the harm in it, but.
Why don't we,
You guys have
why don't we do this? Why don't we then, to provide proper due diligence, we don't have any applications that will be near approving or processing before our March meeting.
Great.
So we can do all of that. We can do a one broad webinar, invite the developer community as well as our municipal partners. That makes
Well,
sense.
I mean, the developers are gonna want to pay us, as less tax as possible. I mean, if I was a developer, I'd say, I want 100% pilot for 20 years. I
Well,
mean,
you know what they're gonna say, but I think it's more saleable if you've given them the opportunity to comment rather than do a cram down. I mean, yeah, it's certainly within our right, but just because it's in our right doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
There's no downside to including them.
You got it.
Assuming the county executive and legislature are aware of what we're doing as well.
They have not been provided this because I didn't know if we needed to make any final comments or changes. So they will receive a final copy of this with a slide deck to kind of summarize. And then what we'll do is we'll get a date on the calendar to do if they want to do a separate meeting, we can do that. And if not, we can just do one open invitation webinar to municipalities and developers alike.
Perfect.
So we're gonna go through this. Natalie's already made the changes on the schedule for residential. We're just gonna read through the language, make sure everything that is in there needs to be in there, and we will get this out.
Okay.
So for purposes of our regular board meeting, we will not have it on February. We'll push to March. I forgot quickly what month is going.
Yes.
Jim, I'm sorry, did I cut you off? Were you about to
I think it's good. Just look at the first sentence of section 10. You don't need to do it now. I think that's supposed to say it lists, you can be a qualified transferee, but I think it's supposed to say if the following conditions are met or something along those lines.
Okay, thank you. I'll
Does
check
that
that.
transfer, does the transfer happen? I'm just not completely clear in reading. Does the transfer happen as a matter of right? Or is it a maybe? What's our obligation on a transfer?
I mean, practice has been that if the project, the criteria we've used is that if the project does not change substantively, so and the applicant, the prior owner has been in good standing with the IDA, we've basically considered that as a automatic transfer. I mean, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but since I've been here, that's
No,
sort of.
you're right, Stacy. However, even though the documents could be read to state that they are entitled to it, very few, if any, will invest in a project of any size without getting the consent of the IDA. Even though you could read the documents to say if it's the same project and they're in full compliance, they could transfer it. Very few people will come in and buy a $30-50 million project without getting our blessing in the form of a resolution.
Right, so that
Not very
typically
few, I would say none.
So is that transfer right, a may or a must? I mean, must we approve it or we may approve it?
I would say that we may approve it. It depends if we find something different about the way the company's going to operate. You know, if there's some difference from what the initial obligations were, if they're not in full conformity with that. But
Okay,
again, we've always, they've uniformly been approved, but they have to go through the process. And I haven't seen any companies that will come in and, you know, for example, buy mains without getting approval to continue with the tax exemptions. And the only ones that really matter are the pilot, because by that time, the sales tax is gone, the mortgage tax is gone. It's simply a matter of the pilot. And usually by the time a transfer comes, you're fairly far down the schedule.
50 Front Street.
But under the new one, they're going to be required to come before us and get approval and pay a fee.
Okay,
a lot more information required too.
okay.
Yeah, it's basically a new app. Jim, it's gonna basically be a new application.
Okay, that's what I was trying to drive at. Thank you.
Yeah, yep. I'm sorry if I was a little circuitous there.
You weren't. I learn every time you speak. It was great.
That's my job, Jim.
Any final questions for Kevin while we've got him on the line?
Thank you, Kevin.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you,
Nice
Kevin.
presentation.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Okay, Stacy, did you have anything else in regards to the UTEP at this point?
I do not. I've got, we've got our marching orders. We're gonna get right on this, get this out there to the municipal partners and yeah, we'll let you know as soon as we have a date planned for a follow-up webinar on this. So I think we're in good shape.
So, so just going forward, we're getting feedback and then we're gonna have another webinar based on what you ascertain. Is that the idea or?
Yeah, we're, like I said, we're putting together just a short slide deck that kind of summarizes this. We'll certainly send the full document, but as
Okay,
well,
okay.
a summary as well. And yeah, we'll just schedule a time, you know, either in the early evening or lunch hour in which we can walk through this with municipal, you know, towns, villages, et
Okay.
cetera. And like, again, happy to do a separate meeting with the county, which I will put on the table as well.
Okay. All right, great.
All right.
So I don't think, is there any other business that you have at this point, Stacy?
I do not. Nope, I'm good.
John, do you have anything at this point in time?
Nope, thank you.
Okay, so entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion by Cheryl.
Is there a second?
Jim, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you.